Hi there, and thank you for joining me for today's live reading of Cutter, Devil Spawn Daddies by Victoria Saccenti, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1, Garden City, Georgia. Cutter had timed the ride home to the minute. After spending most of the morning and afternoon in Dublin with Baron and Johnny Gunn, his closest brothers, handling tedious MC business, he deserved a release. Nothing was more exhilarating and magical than plowing into the wind as the sun was going down and the world around him turned gold. If he could, he'd bottle this feeling just to hold on to it a little longer. As he rode through Garden City's steel and cement landscape, the thrill stopped and the magic died. He brought his chopper to a full stop in front of the MC's preferred convenience store to pick up supplies for the clubhouse. But as he kicked down the bike's stand, gunfire, angry shouts, and a woman's desperate cries flew out of the store. He jumped down, swung the glass door open, and rushed inside without a thought for his safety. Johnny Gunn and Baron ran after him. Who? Where? He yelled at the woman half tucked behind the counter. She pointed a trembling finger to the refrigerated section in the rear. Cutter came around the partition, took in the grim scenario, and realized it was already too late. But he'd give it a shot anyway. The back door was open. That's how the shooter must have escaped. The victim, a young man somewhere in his 20s, lay on his back amid a sea of shattered glass. Wide-eyed, he gurgled and gasped for air while clutching his neck. Blood gushed through his fingers. Carefully, Cutter knelt at his side, assessing the situation. Time on Earth was ending for this soul. Cutter, let's go, man, Johnny Gunn urged from behind him. Are you deaf? Sirens are coming. You can't be here when the cops arrive. The bastards will try to pin this on you. I can't. He needs help, Cutter barked, tearing at his sleeve. He turned to Johnny Gunn. See if you can find me some bandages or gauze, anything like that. Gotta stop the bleeding. Working as quickly as the spurting blood would allow him, he managed to wrap his torn sleeve around the wound. Immediately, blood drenched the makeshift bandage. Jesus, Cutter, what are you doing? You can't stay. Baron joined Johnny's pleas. Johnny G, Cutter exclaimed. There's nothing good here, Johnny called out from behind a shelf. The wail of sirens grew louder. Hey, Cutter, come on, man, Baron insisted, shaking his shoulder. We gotta go. Cutter ignored Baron and Johnny G. He focused on the dying victim's panicked eyes. Clasping the young man's hand, he bent closer. Don't listen to them. You're not alone. I'm staying with you. Hold on, help is coming. The guy blinked. His expression softened, and Cutter squeezed his hand harder. A faint smile crossed the victim's lips. His breath slowed, and he quietly slipped away. Holding his bloodied hands, Cutter sat back on his haunches, staring at the carnage, the wasted life, the tragic outcome of violence. According to the dictionary, carnage signified the deaths of many, and most people would argue the definition of the word with him. But to Cutter, who'd seen and lived in violence for so long, one victim equated to hundreds. He was growing progressively weary of the bloodletting. A hard hand fell on his shoulder. Get up. We already have your buddies. He glanced up to face the officer at his side. We didn't do this. But even before he spoke, he knew his words would fall on deaf ears. The triangle patch on his cut with the number 1 and the percent symbol was enough reason for the authorities to bring him in. Explanations and exonerating statements could come later. Can I at least wash my hands? He asked as the officer cuffed his wrists and pulled him toward the patrol car. What about our bikes? Sure, wash at the station. The bikes will be safe enough. Forensics is coming. This is a crime scene. The officer jutted his chin toward his partner, who was setting up the police-only yellow perimeter tape. An ambulance and an unmarked detective vehicle screeched to a halt outside the line. 2 paramedics scrambled out with a stretcher, and 3 suits stepped out of the car. An officer met them, presumably to report his findings. Activity around the convenience store was growing. Shit, the bikes are safer than us, was his thought as his head was pushed down and he sat in the back of the squad car. Fuck, Cutter, I warned you, Johnny Gunn grumbled next to him. We should have left, but fuck no. Mr. Good Samaritan had to stay and help. And for what? They'll straighten it out, he said. We didn't do shit, and the store owner will testify soon enough. Where's Baron? On his way, Johnny replied. A squad car stopped by and they threw him in there. He'll be waiting for us at the station, and he ain't gonna be happy. Guaranteed. As the squad car sped along Main Street headed to the station, Cutter sat back, pushing the bad memories out of mind. This was fucking deja vu for him. The last time he'd been rushed to the station in one of these, his situation had been pretty dire. The shouting between rival club members, thuds of bats striking flesh, and the gunfire still echoed in his mind. Many of his devil's spawn brethren had been injured that night. Cutter had escaped unscathed, and so had Blade, the MC president and his best friend in life. But when the security guard of the warehouse where the fight took place was found unconscious with a nasty blow to the head, the cops arrested Blade. Despite Blade's protestations, Cutter had stepped in, claiming the warehouse had been dark, and in the confusion, he'd struck the guard accidentally. Plus, Blade's old lady's cell had recently given birth to a baby boy. His wife and baby needed him, and Cutter couldn't allow his friend, almost brother, to go away and ruin his record when he'd just become a father. The guard recovered, but an ambitious DA had wanted to make a point, and Cutter ended up in county jail despite a clean record. However, the truth has a funny way of coming out when least expected. Oh well, water under the bridge. As he snapped out of the pass, the squad car pulled into the station and stopped hard at the entrance. One officer came out of the building to take Johnny Gunn inside, while the second officer in the patrol car opened Cutter's door. "We're here, sweetheart," the officer sneered. "Someone's waiting to talk to you." Cutter didn't respond. Why bother? They were on the officer's home turf, and he was at a disadvantage. He was led past the receiving area to a hallway lined with benches. Johnny went left, and Cutter was led to the right, then ushered into an interrogation room. Here we go. If Cutter had expected any physical unpleasantness inside that room, it didn't happen. The officer removed his cuffs, pointed at a chair, and walked out without another word. Sighing, Cutter sat facing the door, then folded his hands, growing stiff with caked blood above the table. Any minute, whoever was interested in him would come in. So far, he'd managed to tread carefully around the border of anxiety and fear. "Stay cool. You didn't do anything wrong," he reminded himself again. The door opened and Cutter's heart skipped a beat. Emily Mayhew, the petite brunette entering the room holding a file and notepad in one hand and a wad of paper towels in the other, had been one of his arresting officers at the warehouse after the fight. The woman had captured his imagination and taken center stage in many of his dreams. Emily had been all business and police officer like then, but her putting the cuffs on him had inspired all sorts of titillating and unforgettable fantasies. Although he should have been worried about his situation and imminent arrest, his attention had been glued to the officer's luscious feminine curves, which the masculine uniform and utility belt hadn't been able to hide. Something about her that went beyond her looks had left an indelible impression on his mind and libido. While she'd read him his rights and a list of warnings in her clear voice, he'd nodded, half listening as he took in her perfect breasts, intelligent blue eyes, and plump lips, greedy and anxious, stretched around his cock. Damn, the image had been so vivid, it had stayed with him so long after his time in jail. And here she was now, in the flesh. Tonight, a plain skirt and a long-sleeve blouse buttoned almost to the neckline, where a thin pearl necklace peeked out, had replaced the austere police blue. This look was softer, made her look more approachable, even though she'd tied her black hair in a high bun, adding an air of formality and distance. But her fragrance shattered her efforts. Like so many of her memorable physical traits, her subtle perfume wreaked havoc and threatened his control. The aroma pulled him in. The desire to run his fingers through that glossy, heavy mass and bury his nose to inhale her scent was nearly unbearable. His focus was shot to shit. "Good evening, Mr. Zajac. I'm Detective Emily Mayhew." Emily quietly placed the file and notepad on the table along with the wad of damp paper towels and sat down. "Cutter." Snatching the paper towels, he wiped the dried blood off his hands. "I beg your pardon?" "I said, Cutter." He balled up the dirty towels and tossed them into the corner wastebasket. "Forgive me, She flipped the file open and read, "Says here..." "Don't bother," he cut in. "I know what it says. The name's Cutter. Cutter. He spelled his name one letter at a time. And nothing else. The old son of a bitch, Mr. Zajac's dead. Hard evidence that karma and maybe a god exist after all." Emily leaned back against her chair, studying the file, then glanced up at his face. She frowned and nodded. "Oh yes, it's coming back to me. I remember. The fight at the warehouse between two rival MC groups a few years back." "4, he grunted, "if memory serves." Why was he being so aggressive with her? She'd only read the material given in the file. "I'm pissed. She doesn't remember me, and like the fool that I am, she's been stuck in my mind for years." Congratulations, I see you're a detective now, he smiled, trying to smooth his grating attitude. The civvy clothes suit you. Careful. Well, his expression must have said too much because the girl blushed. Girl, where did that come from? Still blushing, she averted her gaze. On the spot, his dick took notice of the telltale submissive behavior. Did he hear a faint quiver in her voice? Breathing quickly, she scanned the top of the table looking for. Cutter was reminded of a besieged small creature seeking an exit. Whatever it was, she didn't find it. With a jerk, she glanced up. As I was trying to say, I didn't call you in to arrest you or your friends. The convenience store situation has been cleared up. I needed to talk to you. In private, please, if you'll hear me out. The pleading in her soft tone cemented his suspicions. A vanilla guy might have missed it, but not Cutter. Whether she knew it or not, Detective Emily Mayhew was a submissive. Need? Private? Interesting. Cutter fiddled with his beard, gathering his wits. He'd prepare himself for a hostile interrogation or an in-depth Q&A session, not meeting up with a cute and feisty police officer who'd once made such a powerful impression. Clearing her throat, Emily pushed her chair back from the table and stood. Crossing her hands behind her back, she paced. He supposed she had to gather her wits as well. Emily arched a perfect eyebrow. Okay, Cutter is fine whenever our conversations are informal, but when higher-ups are present, I'll call you Mr. Luka Zajac, and you'll have to accept it. Is that clear? Fair enough, Detective Mayhew. Good. I think we understand each other. Looking at the open file, she flipped one document over, then glanced up and locked her dark blue gaze with his. I have a proposition for you. Would you consider working with the Garden City Police? I realize I'm taking a chance and asking for a lot. She pressed her fingertips on the table. As a rule, bikers don't trust cops. Plus, your case was poorly handled. Poorly? He blurted. Lady, that's the understatement of a lifetime. You're right, and I'm deeply sorry. I wish I could undo what happened, but I don't have that power. I'm hoping that when you listen to what I have to say, you'll be persuaded to help me. She sat. I really need your help with this investigation. Should you agree, you'd be working directly with me and no one else. She grinned, and I promise to call you Cutter whenever possible. Not in a million years had he expected to hear such a strange offer. Detective Mayhew had taken him completely by surprise. He studied her for a long minute. She held his scrutiny with aplomb. The detective was back in place. Any trace of skittery shyness was gone. There was no evasion, nothing to make the hairs on his skin bristle with warning. Okay, I'll bite. What's going on? Frowning, she pointed at the black glass square on the wall. Be assured, this conversation is entirely between us. The observation room on the other side of the wall is empty. No one's listening or watching. I locked that door before I came in here, and the keys are in my pocket. She patted the side of her skirt. I won't be betrayed, nor will I risk this investigation because of negligence or unwanted listeners. She sat back and dropped her elegant hands on the table. An air of mystery and intrigue floated in the room. He was all in. I've studied your club, she continued. Even though you wear the 1%er patch, the Devil Spawn don't quite fit the standard image of an outlaw MC. I don't mean to offend you. Shrugging one shoulder, she gave him an apologetic smile. The Spawn reminds me of a group of mischievous grown-up boys who are essentially good guys, but on occasion get into hot water. Emily stood again, and Cutter watched her without interrupting. Since I joined the Garden City Police, the Spawn's most violent incident has been the fight at the warehouse, when you took the rap for your friend Blade. He scoffed under his breath, and she paused, shaking her head. Nice try, but I won't buy it. We were all aware of your sacrifice. However, that was your choice. In addition to that fight, the record shows some of your members have been pulled over for speeding, others for drunk and disorderly behavior, and some for minor shoplifting, which, in most cases, was resolved right away. She turned to face him, but none of you have engaged in major crimes, such as human trafficking, gun running, or doing business with drug cartels. You're right on all counts, he nodded. Blade has worked night and day to change the club's activities and allegiance. He'd kick out anyone trying to stop the changeover. Privately, however, he recalled a rather recent event when 2 Devil Spawns went rogue and nearly tore the club apart. That night, MC justice had been served according to their sacrosanct traditions and established laws. He'd never reveal that to the prim proper and cute little Detective Mayhew. A new outlaw outfit has set up shop in Pooler. she said. According to prelim reports, the club has ties with Oquenda cartel. The little community to the west of I-95 has few resources and has asked for our help. The Oquendos? He gave a soft whistle. I'm afraid so. I know Pooler, he said. Who's come in? They call themselves Sons of Chaos. He gawked. What the? Someone's been watching way too much TV. Emily chuckled. Yep, they almost went over the edge of copyright infringement. What do you want from me? We need intel. Solid information we can act on, she sighed. Initially, I thought of infiltrating an undercover cop into chaos, but won't work, he waved a hand. The MC lifestyle, language, and customs are tricky. A cop pretending to be a prospect would be made in seconds, and if the club has criminal leanings, you'd never see him again. That was my fear. She sat again. When the incident at the convenience store was radioed in, and one of the officers reported what you had done for the victim, the light bulb went off in my brain. Meaning? To be blunt, you're a shoo-in, made for the part. To the world, Luca Cutter Zajac, Devil Spawn Sergeant at Arms, carries a well-known grudge against the law. He's a rough biker who knows the ins and outs of the MC world better than most, but only a select few knew the truth. He's a decent man, loyal to a fault, and a fierce fighter capable of taking care of himself in a bad situation. She finished quietly. Damn, the little detective had him pegged. Worse, the heat on his face told him he'd blushed. So much for being a hardened biker. He wiped his face with both hands, covering the silly, girlish reaction. Now, listen. If I agree to do this, and I'm not saying I will because I have to think about it, Blade has to be in the loop. That's non-negotiable. It's your choice, Cutter. Remember, the exposure is all yours. In my opinion, the fewer people involved, the better the results of this operation will be, and the safer you'll be. The change dynamic between them, his rising from detainee to a key asset in her investigation, and hearing his name on her lips did funny things to his heart. 20 minutes into this meeting with this gorgeous and smart woman, not only was he hooked, but he'd happily undertake any dangerous job or mission for her. Besides, that hint of submissiveness had to be explored. Blade is my backup and safe passage into the club, he continued. To make friends and infiltrate them, I'd have to meet the chaos on their own turf, wearing neutral or at least no Spawn colors. Kind of difficult to do because my allegiance is well known. Any sudden shift attracts attention, makes people wonder. If a crossover agreement is reached between the MC presidents, that would open the door for me. Bring Blade into the mix. I see your point. It's a delicate balance. You've no idea, he folded his arms. Huge egos and old traditions are involved. Didn't think about that. And not to change the subject, but what are you doing with my guys, Johnny G and Baron? She pointed over her shoulder. They're waiting for you in the receiving area. They were informed, same as you were, that the store owner had cleared up the assault situation. You guys came in and helped her out. The victim was a new employee. She's both grateful and distraught. And the robber? Skipped out the back after shooting the employee. He's in the wind. Pity. He scratched the back of his neck. Poor kid didn't deserve to go that way. Emily shrugged. This is the harsh reality we deal with day in and day out. She stood. I don't want to pressure you, but could you give me an idea of when you might decide? Cutter stood after her. Might take me as long as a couple days. I need to evaluate the situation and run it by Blade. It's not just me. He has to be on board too. Sure, I understand, and you're right. I didn't take into consideration the seemingly small yet quite critical details. She extended her hand to shake his. Thanks for listening to my proposal. I hope you'll decide to help me. Cutter clasped her small hand in his without shaking it. Acting on his suspicions, he stroked his thumb over the silky skin on the back of her hand. The touch was light, almost a caress, carrying a possessive message. Emily's dark blue eyes flashed with a peculiar light, then it was gone. Another woman would have pulled away from him, rejected him outright. Not Emily. She smoothly retrieved her hand without voicing a complaint or protesting his irregular behavior. Yep, his suspicions were on point. Where? He asked. She cocked her head. Where what? Do we meet if I accept? Because unless I'm arrested for something big, I'm not coming back to the station. That would be a dead giveaway for anyone tailing me. I can call or text, but from time to time we'll have to meet in person somewhere. Right. She clasped her hands, her eyes shifting as if she were thinking. What about your place? He said quickly. I'd offered mine, but I'm a bachelor and kind of messy, so my decor could offend your feminine sensibilities. Emily's sudden laughter made him smile. Feminine sensibilities? She laughed even harder. You're funny, Cutter. I lost those the day I joined the force. Okay, I guess my place will have to do. She tore a sheet off her notepad, scribbled quickly, and passed it to him. This is my address and personal phone number. Do not call the station for any reason. That'll raise a ton of red flags. There's one person I trust who also needs to be brought into our special collaboration. Plus, I have enemies who still resent my promotion. Enemies? No, a sweet thing like yourself can't have any enemies. Her brow tightened. I'm not that sweet, I promise you. Is that right? Going into full dominant mode, Cutter pushed and probed the dark blue gaze. Privacy walls upon privacy walls and defenses upon sturdy defenses met his search. All the stiff barriers Emily Mayhew had carefully propped up to conceal and protect a tender soul curled up in a fright. Fuck yes, she was his ideal combination of sweet, sassy, and submissive, and something more, an exciting and special trait that would fit in with his untapped daddy proclivities.